The former editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, Dr. Marcia Angel, states, "It is simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published, or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. I take no pleasure in this conclusion, which I reached slowly and reluctantly over my 2 decades as an editor of the New England Journal of Medicine." Richard Horton made a similar statement last year in which he concluded that science has taken a turn towards darkness. Do the panel agree with the above eminent editors that science and medicine have taken a turn to darkness? And if so, how do you propose this is addressed?
Okay, I'll start with Peter.
So I think that's a very nihilistic view by both editors because it actually is rather denigrating to thousands and thousands of people who've spent an awful lot of time trying to develop the right trials and research to actually find the evidence. So it's a rather harsh judgment they've come out from their perspective. I think we have to keep in mind that research is always evolving, and I was actually reflecting back to the question about guidelines. I mean, one of a very good example of where research can be wrong is there was a guideline on intravenous fluid for adults in the UK. It advocated the use of colloid solutions, which are starch-based, and that was based on the evidence available. Unfortunately, much of the evidence around starch-based solutions was fraudulent, and the guideline was therefore wrong and had to be withdrawn and revised. So I think there is that element sometimes that research can be wrong, and in extreme cases maybe even fraudulent, but the vast majority of it, I think, is being done for laudable reasons by people who actually are putting an awful lot of time and energy into doing it well. And I wouldn't be as skeptical or nihilistic as the editors you quote.
Gerry, you pessimistic?
Pessimistic. Well, I believe it rather harsh, but I do agree that obviously science, the generation of new knowledge has taken us forward, has done for many centuries, and hopefully will continue, and I know will continue in the future. But obviously, our navigation point must always be rooted in clinical practice and what makes care better for patients. And I think that in ever what we do, we need to be engaged with our clinicians, our community, our patient, our public face, need to be rooted in all the things that we do within clinical research. Those need to modify the direction of where we're going, rather than other potential influences or drivers to research that goes maybe in other directions.
Terence.
Well, we're here tonight talking about professionalism, and of course, as a GMC, if doctors commit research fraud or plagiarism, then we will go after them, and there's plenty of examples, and Andrew Wakefield's a very good example. So doctors as scholars includes not just treating the patient in front of you, but what you put in the public domain that misleads other people. So I absolutely get that. But I agree with Peter. I think it's hugely nihilistic. In my own professional career, the last 30 years, risk of cot death halved by research, Haemophilus meningitis eradicated by a new vaccine discovered in my lifetime, the survival of leukemia going from 30% up to 80%. That's all due to good research, which is, you can't argue with it because those people are surviving and they were dying. And so I think that's a very sad, perhaps that's what happens when you're being too long in the tooth as an editor of a medical journal.
Paddy.
No, just to very much agree. Actually, I've been part of a debate with Richard on this very topic around one of the editorials he wrote around mammography a couple of years ago. And what we have to, I suppose, really grapple with in medicine is that a lot of the answers are not really straightforward. It's a straightforward thing at times to pose the question or the next question, but actually getting to the answer with a level of validity that we can be absolutely sure about is the challenge. It's one of the reasons why we have large randomized studies. It actually helps us protect, in some respects, the very nature of the scientific inquiry, and hopefully helps us to have more surety that where those results are positive, that they really mean something. And just as Terence has said, in my world, in cancer, it has been transformed. In 1994, I remember having a conversation with one of the directors of the National Cancer Institute, Bruce Chabner, who's the head of oncology at MGH. And the conversation was along the lines of, where will we get the next drug for colorectal cancer or for gastric cancer? 10 years later, the challenge in oncology was, how do we actually develop the drugs properly? And that level of complexity has now gone up even more with molecular subsetting around various treatments, not only in cancer but in other diseases. So having the rigor that is in place, I have to say, and I have rarely seen the level of rigor even in other disciplines that we put into how we do, particularly drug discovery and treatment and the development of new treatments. I have to say I am very reassured that the quality of what comes out at the end is actually very good. That's not to say that it should not be continually challenged, that there may be better ways of doing it, nor should we move away from challenging what we call standard of care, because in some instances standard of care has been developed in very different clinical paradigms. But I absolutely agree that those types of editorials do not do justice to the thousands of patients who have actually helped bridge us and bring us to a new understanding.
Why do you think it is that people of that kind of intellect who have been involved in the world, is it as I think was suggested, that you become cynical if you're an editor for a long time? Or is there something else that's going on that makes these people so challenging and unaccepting of a world that they're viewing?
Well, quite often, as you will know, Neil, it is often sparked, that type of editorial, by a controversial issue that has arisen. Either in the therapeutic landscape, diagnostic landscape, or whatever, and those things can happen, and they can even be part of standard of care, and we've had to go back and revise and think what we do. So usually what you find are editorials written in that sort of complex environment where there's a contemporary issue of the day that actually needs to be discussed. At the same time, I actually think those editors fall down in their wider responsibility to actually measure their comments more broadly in terms of how medical research is done, because I don't think they actually do that justice.
And in the sense that doing what they're doing is not a risk-free thing because it affects the environment on which they comment.
Correct.